Recently, I met with a lady who attends a church in town that is very rigid. They don't believe in using musical instruments in worship. They don't believe in lifting hands in worship. In fact, the lady told me that if you lift your hands in worship, they'll actually ask you to put them down. You can't clap, you can't dance, you can't shout. I'm guessing you can't even smile. Forget about the fact that all of these things are mentioned in the Bible. One could argue that we are commanded to include these things in worship. But the point of my meeting with this lady was that she was miserable. She married into this church and is dying spiritually. She desperately wants more freedom in worship, but is in a place that doesn't allow it. She came seeking advice, but all I could really offer was a prayer. Her visit caused me to consider this. Why is it that so many of us struggle to find freedom in worship, especially when we serve a God who paid for that freedom? If the Son has set us free, aren't we free indeed? Well, during the lifetime of Jesus, the temple in Jerusalem was the center of Jewish religious life. It was the place that animal sacrifices were carried out, that worship, according to the law of Moses, was followed faithfully. The temple had three main parts. There was the courts, the holy place where only priests could enter, and the most holy place, or Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies was the most sacred place on the earth. It was the place that symbolized the presence of God with His chosen people. Only one person could enter that room, and only on one very special day of the year. On the Day of Atonement, the high priest would make atonement for himself and then enter into the Holy of Holies to make atonement for the people. Hebrews chapter 9 tells us that in the temple, a veil separated the Holy of Holies from the rest of the temple where men dwelt. This veil signified that man was separated from God by sin. According to some Jewish historians, this veil was 60 feet high and 4 inches thick. It was said that horses tied to each other could not pull the veil apart, or horses tied to each side could not pull the veil apart. But when Jesus died, the veil was torn in two, and God moved out of that place, never again to dwell in a temple made with hands. And until that historic moment, the veil in the temple declared, "Keep out, do not enter." However, from that moment on, the torn veil declares freedom. Anyone who wants to can come on in. Consider the words of Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 through 22. And so, dear brothers and sisters, we can boldly enter heaven's most holy place because of the blood of Jesus. By His death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place. And since we have a great high priest who rules over God's house, let us go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting Him. For our guilty consciences have been sprinkled with Christ's blood to make us clean, and our bodies have been washed with pure water. When we talk about freedom in worship, this is where it all begins. Jesus made the way for us to enter God's holy presence. The veil that separated man from God was removed. Today, as we approach God in His presence, let us first celebrate the freedom that Jesus gives us from sin, and let us also celebrate the freedom that we have in worship. You see, freedom from sin gives us freedom to worship. Now, how does this give us freedom in worship? Well, for starters, we don't have to go to a specific place to worship. Secondly, we don't have to rely on some priest to go to bat for us. We can go to God personally through Jesus, our high priest. Because of this, we have freedom in worship, free to worship without regard for what others might think, free to worship just to bask in God's presence, free to come as we are with hope of what God can help us become, free just to worship.